I opened the door to my own house and froze. My son, Jason, was sitting on the living room couch, laptop in front of him, a smug grin plastered across his face. "You can't come in, Mom," he said without looking up. "The house is mine now." I blinked. I had just come home from a week-long trip visiting my sister. I thought I was walking into my son's usual welcome, but this was something else entirely. My own son, a man I raised, was standing guard in my living room, acting like I was a stranger. I don't understand," I stammered. "Jason, you're joking, right?" He shook his head. "No joke. Dad left me the money, the house, everything. It's all mine. You need to respect that. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. If stories like this one resonate with you, hit subscribe. I could feel the walls closing in. My hands trembled as I gripped the doorknob. $25 million. That's the inheritance he was referring to. The fortune left by his father, my late husband, who had trusted me to guide Jason through life. I thought we were a team. I thought he valued my advice. But now, he was shutting me out entirely. The house felt smaller, colder. Every family photo on the wall suddenly looked like a lie. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg him to remember the bond we shared, but I stayed silent. I had learned long ago that anger would get me nowhere, and then he said something that pierced me deeper than anything else. "Honestly, Mom, I don't need you anymore. I can handle this on my own." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just teenage rebellion. It was greed, arrogance, and a total disregard for everything I had done for him. Something had shifted, and I had no idea how far it would go. I always believed Jason would grow up kind, grounded, and thoughtful. From the moment he was born, I devoted myself entirely to him. His father had died when Jason was 12, and suddenly, I was both mother and father. Every day, I carried the weight of grief alongside the responsibility of raising him. I worked long hours, cooked meals, drove him to school, and attended every soccer practice. I read to him at night and helped him with his homework, even when I was exhausted. Each sacrifice felt natural because I loved him more than anything in the world. Our home was modest, warm, and full of memories. We had a small garden where Jason learned to plant flowers, a tiny library with worn books stacked in organized chaos, and walls covered in photographs. Birthdays, vacations, school plays, family dinners, every picture represented a moment of care, love, and patience. I wanted him to grow up with the knowledge that love was constant and enduring. I hoped he would also understand gratitude, humility, and the importance of integrity. Jason discovered a keen sense for business when he was 15. I remember the first lemonade stand he set up at a local fair. He was meticulous, calculating costs and profits, and insisted on reinvesting every penny into better ingredients and signage. I guided him patiently, teaching him how to manage money, make plans, and consider consequences. Even as he excelled in school and then in internships, I tried to temper his ambition with lessons in empathy and responsibility. His brilliance filled me with pride, though I secretly worried that sharp intelligence could turn into arrogance if unchecked. After college, I helped him navigate adulthood. I co-signed his first apartment lease, advised him on budgeting for groceries and rent, and offered guidance on his first real job. Throughout those years, I kept reminders of our shared past, letters from teachers, birthday cards, keys from old apartments, even small trinkets that symbolized milestones. These objects were not just memorabilia. They were anchors meant to remind him of where he came from, of the roots that shaped him, and the love that guided him. When his father's will was finally read, Jason inherited $25 million. The house, investments, and some liquid assets all passed to him. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief because I knew his future was secure, and anxiety because wealth, especially sudden wealth, had a way of changing people. At first, he was cautious and thoughtful. He asked questions, listened, and seemed to value my input. He wanted my advice on investments, taxes, even lifestyle choices. I felt reassured, believing that despite the money, he remained grounded. Then the shift happened almost overnight. He began speaking with a new tone, a subtle arrogance that hadn't been there before. "Mom, I've got this," he said more than once, dismissing my guidance. He waved off my suggestions on managing his money, almost with contempt. Even small things, like which stocks to consider or how to hire advisors, were brushed aside. I laughed nervously at first, thinking it was the excitement of sudden wealth, but deep down, I felt a chill. Something was changing, and it wasn't good. Soon he started locking doors, keeping me out of discussions, acting as though I was a guest in the home I had raised him in. The symbolic objects, letters, keys, trinkets, photographs, felt suddenly irrelevant to him. He moved them aside as if they belonged to a past he no longer valued. I tried to remind him gently that experience and guidance mattered, that wisdom wasn't something you bought, but he seemed determined to prove he could succeed without me. Each day felt like a small betrayal, each dismissal a crack in the bond I had worked so hard to maintain. I began keeping journals. Every slight, every dismissive glance, every new, arrogance-laden remark was noted. I needed a record, a reminder of the person Jason had been before money distorted him. It felt strange, almost clinical, to observe my own son in this way, but I knew a storm was coming. He was no longer a boy who needed guidance. He was a man with power, influence, and wealth beyond imagination, and I feared the person he was becoming. Even simple interactions became tense. Dinner conversations that once included laughter and stories were replaced by terse nods and short answers. I tried small gestures, bringing him his favorite meal, asking about his day, but they were ignored. I realized that wealth had not only given him freedom, but arrogance. The boy who once held my hand when he was scared now stood in front of me like a stranger, confident he didn't need me. And yet, despite the distance, I refused to give up. I reminded myself daily that bonds run deeper than money, that love and patience could endure anything. I believed in the foundation we had built, even if Jason didn't. Every photograph, every key, every note in that house was a symbol of our life together. And even if he tried to deny it, I hoped that one day he would remember. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I had arrived early at the house, hoping to talk to Jason before his day began. I carried a folder with some documents I thought might help him manage his investments. Nothing intrusive, just guidance I believed he needed. When I stepped inside, I realized the front door had been locked from the inside. I knocked. Jason? Can we talk? My voice trembled slightly, though I tried to keep it steady. No response. I pressed my ear to the door. I could hear movement, the shuffle of papers, the quiet click of his laptop keys. It was as though he had constructed a barrier between us, not just physically, but emotionally. Panic swirled inside me. I had raised him to value family, to respect me, to seek advice when the weight of decisions was too much. And now, he was cutting me out completely. I tried calling him. His phone rang once, twice, and then went straight to voicemail. I left a message, "Jason, it's Mom. Please, just talk to me. I'm here to help." I thought he would return my call immediately, like he always had when he needed guidance, but nothing. Hours passed. I began pacing, feeling more like a stranger in my own home than a mother in her son's life. By afternoon, I decided to check the mailbox. There was a letter addressed to me, handwritten in Jason's unmistakable scrawl. I opened it with trembling fingers. "Mom, I appreciate everything you've done, but I don't need you anymore. I'm capable of handling things on my own. Please respect my space. The house, the money, it's mine. This isn't up for discussion. Jason." I felt a sharp sting in my chest. The words were polite, almost calm, but the meaning was brutal. He was officially shutting me out. The son I had nurtured, the boy who once clutched my hand when he was scared, had transformed overnight into someone I barely recognized. And all of it, I realized, had started the moment he gained access to that inheritance. I tried reasoning with myself. Maybe he just needed time, I told myself. Perhaps the sudden wealth had overwhelmed him. Maybe this was a test, a phase. But as I walked through the house, I noticed subtle changes. The photos were rearranged. Some letters I had tucked away carefully were gone. Even the small trinkets we had collected over years were displaced. It was symbolic. He was erasing our history, drawing lines where none had existed before. By evening, my concern had turned to fear. I could sense something deeper brewing beneath his arrogance. That night, I sat by the window, staring at the darkened streets outside, listening to the faint hum of the city, and wondered how it had come to this. How had my son, my own child, become someone so determined to exclude me, so intent on declaring independence in such a cruel, dismissive way? I realized that I needed to act carefully. Any confrontation now could push him further away. But I couldn't simply stand by and watch him make mistakes, big mistakes. The inheritance was vast, but wealth could be a trap. It could blind him, mislead him, and destroy not only his future, but our relationship entirely. That night, I found myself flipping through old letters, photographs, and keys, symbols of the life we had shared. Each item was a reminder of love, guidance, and patience. I thought about the lessons I had taught him about responsibility, honesty, and respect. Somewhere in that wealth, in that sudden power, I hoped there was still a part of Jason that remembered those lessons. I went to bed with a sense of unease, knowing that the coming days would test me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I didn't know what form his next move would take, or if he would ever realize the consequences of shutting me out. But one thing was clear: the inheritance had awakened something in him, something reckless and untested, and I had to prepare myself to navigate the storm before it became a hurricane. By the end of that week, the reality settled in like a cold stone in my chest. Jason wasn't just ignoring me. He had declared war on the bond we shared, and I had to find a way back in before it was too late. The next morning, I decided I couldn't wait for Jason to come to me. If he wasn't willing to listen, I would have to find a way to understand what had changed him, and fast. I began by retracing the past week's events, examining every interaction, every word, and every expression that might hint at what had triggered this sudden distance. I started with the documents I had left on the kitchen table, the ones he had ignored. Investment portfolios, tax strategies, and advice letters. They were all meticulously prepared, yet he hadn't even glanced at them. I realized he was intentionally avoiding my guidance, a deliberate act of independence, or perhaps arrogance. That realization hit me hard. Jason had never acted like this before. He had always valued my insight. Something else was at play. I checked his laptop when he wasn't around, careful not to intrude too obviously, but I needed clues. There were emails from financial advisors I hadn't contacted, newsletters about stock trends, and messages from a man named Ethan who seemed to be coaching him in investment strategies. Every message was confident, even brash. I read a line where Ethan suggested aggressive risks for high returns. My stomach sank. Jason was being led into decisions far beyond his experience, and he wasn't asking for my opinion because he didn't trust me, or worse, because he was determined to prove he could succeed without me. At lunch, I tried a casual conversation. "Jason, have you spoken to any advisors yet?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. He shrugged, barely looking up from his phone. "Yeah, I'm handling it." "Don't worry." I couldn't ignore the shift in tone, the way he no longer made eye contact, the slight sneer in his smile. It was subtle but unmistakable. He was testing boundaries, establishing power, and pushing me out. By mid-afternoon, I began examining the house itself. I checked rooms he frequented, noticing the changes he had made. Papers that had been neatly stacked were now scattered, notes discarded, books shifted. Even the photographs that once reminded me of our family were repositioned, faces cropped out or moved to corners. It was symbolic, a deliberate rewriting of history. Jason was attempting to erase my presence, to redefine the home as exclusively his. I reached out to a few of his old friends, curious if they had noticed the change. Some mentioned that he had become more secretive, dismissive, even boastful about his newfound wealth. One friend told me he had attended parties I wasn't invited to, flaunting his independence. Another said he laughed about ignoring my advice, calling it outdated. Each story cut me deeper, but it also gave me insight. I realized the rebellion wasn't random. It was strategic, a way of asserting control and distancing himself from guidance, even familial guidance. Late that night, I sat alone in the study, flipping through the old letters and keys we had collected over the years. Each key unlocked a memory, each letter a lesson. I found myself thinking about the small moments, the night he stayed up crying after his first heartbreak, the time he was rejected from his first choice college, The birthday, when he had only wanted a simple cake, but I had stayed up all night baking him one anyway. I wondered if he remembered any of that now, or if money had replaced memory. Then I noticed something curious. One envelope, tucked in a drawer, hadn't been touched. It was addressed to Jason from his father, written years ago but never delivered. Inside was a letter about responsibility, patience, and wisdom. I realized then that Jason had access to guidance beyond me, yet he had chosen to ignore even the most heartfelt advice. It was a pattern, a symbol of the growing rift between us. Over the following days, I became almost a detective in my own home. I observed his habits, noting the hours he spent alone, the patterns of his interactions, and the people he consulted. I documented everything meticulously in my journal. Each observation revealed a growing arrogance, a reliance on wealth to define power, and a stubborn refusal to acknowledge the past. Despite the tension, I began planning small interventions. A phone call to remind him of a past lesson, a casual mention of his father's advice, even leaving a key on the kitchen counter as a subtle symbol of our shared history. I wanted to signal that I was still present, still watching, still caring. But I knew I had to be cautious. Too much interference, and he would withdraw completely. Too little, and he might spiral into mistakes that wealth alone couldn't fix. It was during one of these quiet observations that I noticed something else. Jason had started making unusual financial moves, transfers between accounts, purchases that didn't make sense, and sudden consultations with advisors I had never heard of. It was reckless, almost impulsive. My heart raced. I realized the stakes were higher than I had imagined. This wasn't just about arrogance, it was about potential disaster. By the end of the week, tension in the house was palpable. Jason moved like a man on a mission, focused entirely on his independence. I moved like a shadow, observing, recording, planning. The symbols of our past letters, keys, photographs were now more than memories. They were tools, anchors, reminders that I needed to use wisely if I wanted to reconnect with him before it was too late. I went to bed that night, exhausted but determined. The storm had begun, and I had no choice but to navigate it carefully, like a sailor reading the subtle signs of the sea before a hurricane. Jason had declared independence, but I refused to give up. Somewhere beneath his arrogance, the boy I had raised was still there, and I was determined to find him before the inheritance, and his pride destroyed everything we had shared. The following morning, I woke with a lingering unease. Something about Jason's behavior didn't sit right, and my instincts told me there was more than arrogance behind his sudden distance. I decided to investigate further, carefully, without alerting him. If he suspected I was watching too closely, he would withdraw even further. I started with his laptop again, waiting for a moment when he was distracted. This time, I noticed a folder he had labeled, "Urgent, do not touch." My heart skipped a beat, but I opened it anyway, knowing I needed to understand. Inside were spreadsheets, contracts, and emails, complex financial decisions that, frankly, were over his head. Some involved risky investments, sudden transfers, and large sums being moved internationally. My stomach churned. He wasn't just testing boundaries, he was potentially jeopardizing everything his father had worked to secure. Then I saw the unexpected. One document was a letter from an unknown law firm addressed to Jason. It mentioned a private investment opportunity and included terms that made me uneasy. But what really caught my eye was a paragraph in bold. Parental advice has no authority in this matter. Any interference could nullify participation. I paused. This was deliberate. Someone was coaching him to disregard me entirely, convincing him that he could succeed without guidance, that even his own mother's advice was irrelevant. I realized then that Jason's arrogance was being amplified externally. It wasn't just the money, it was someone manipulating him. A chill ran down my spine. I had suspected arrogance, yes, but not manipulation. Someone had targeted him, using his new wealth as leverage. Suddenly, his dismissive attitude, his secrecy, even the locked doors, they all made sense. He wasn't merely testing his independence, he was being guided away from me, encouraged to erase any influence I had. I confronted him that evening, trying to remain calm. "Jason," I said, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, Who is Ethan? Why is he advising you to ignore me? He hesitated, his eyes flicking to mine, but then he smiled faintly, almost arrogantly. Mom, I told you, I've got this. Ethan is just helping me with investments. You don't need to worry about the details. You don't see it? I asked softly, keeping my voice steady. He's telling you to push me out. He's manipulating you. If you follow him blindly, it could ruin everything, not just financially, but for us as mother and son. Jason's jaw tightened. I'm fine, Mom. Really, I know what I'm doing. I sighed, recognizing the futility of argument at that moment. Still, I held a piece of evidence in my hand, a letter from his father, the keys from our past, and the knowledge that someone external was influencing him. I realized that the mini twist of our story was this: Jason's arrogance wasn't entirely his own creation. The real danger was external influence exploiting his sudden wealth, and he was too proud to see it. That night, I placed the documents and letters carefully in a drawer. Symbols of our past, yes, but now also tools for uncovering the truth. I knew I had to tread carefully. Any rash action could push him further into the hands of whoever was guiding him. The mini twist, as I understood it, was subtle but critical. I wasn't just dealing with a son acting out. I was dealing with a son being manipulated. The arrogance, the dismissals, the locked doors, they were symptoms, not causes. And the realization gave me both dread and determination. Dread because the consequences could be severe if I misstepped. Determination because I now had clarity. I had to navigate carefully, using patience, evidence, and subtle guidance to break through the manipulation. By the time I went to bed, I had formed a plan. I would monitor, observe, and intervene quietly, using the symbols of our shared history as anchors. The photographs, letters, and keys were more than memory. They were leverage, reminders that he had once trusted me and could trust me again. And beneath his pride, I knew the boy I raised still existed, waiting for the right moment to reconnect. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. The mini twist had changed everything. Jason's arrogance was not the end of our story. It was an obstacle I could navigate. And the coming days would be crucial. I just had to be patient, precise, and unwavering. The days that followed were unbearable. Jason's arrogance seemed to grow by the hour, fueled by the unseen influence of Ethan and the financial advisors who whispered ideas into his ear. I watched him with a mix of worry and frustration, feeling helpless in my own home. Every conversation was a minefield. Any attempt at guidance was met with dismissal, defensiveness, or outright scorn. One afternoon, I noticed a stack of bills and investment reports on the kitchen counter, left carelessly as if to taunt me. I picked them up and read, my heart sinking. Large sums were being moved into high-risk accounts, and some transfers seemed unnecessary, even reckless. I realized that if Jason continued down this path, he could lose a significant portion of his inheritance in a matter of weeks. The thought made my stomach churn. I tried another approach. I suggested we review the investments together, offering to explain the potential risks. Jason, I just want to make sure you're making informed decisions. You don't have to follow my advice blindly, but I want you to know what's at stake. He laughed, a sound that cut sharper than any insult. Mom, you worry too much. I've got this under control. I don't need lessons from someone who doesn't understand modern finance. Modern finance. The words felt like a slap. He was rejecting not only my guidance, but also my experience, my knowledge, my love. I realized that the conflict wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. He wanted control, independence, and distance, and I had to find a way through it without pushing him further away. I began leaving subtle reminders around the house, a photo of us from a fishing trip, a letter from his father tucked in his drawer, the small keys from old apartments. Each was a symbol, a memory, a quiet anchor to the bond we once shared. But he ignored them. He moved the items, placed them out of sight, and acted as though the past didn't exist. The conflict escalated every time I tried to bridge the gap. One evening, I overheard him on the phone with Ethan. I don't need Mom, he said firmly. I can handle everything myself. Trust me. The voice on the other end chuckled, clearly approving. It was the first time I felt a cold dread settle in my chest. Jason wasn't just testing me, he was being coached to dismiss me entirely. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer about a mother-son dispute. This was manipulation, and the consequences could be devastating. I confronted him later that night, trying to remain calm. "Jason, I know someone is influencing you. I need you to listen to me. This isn't just about advice. It's about your future." He slammed his laptop shut, his face red with frustration. "Mom," I said, "I don't need you. I don't care what you think. This is my life, my money, my decisions. Stop trying to control me." I stepped back, my throat tight. His words were sharp, deliberate. I realized then that the escalation had reached a critical point. He was asserting dominance, testing boundaries, and proving independence at any cost. The emotional stakes were as high as the financial ones. I retreated to my room that night, exhausted and heartbroken. I replayed every memory of his childhood, every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every victory, and wondered how we had come to this moment. How had my son, once trusting and loving, become someone so intent on pushing me away? The conflict wasn't just between us, it was within him, and I had to navigate both. Determined not to give up, I began tracking his actions in detail. Every call, every meeting, every unusual transaction became a piece of a larger puzzle. I realized that understanding the external influence was key. Ethan, the financial advisors, the friends encouraging reckless behavior. They were feeding his arrogance, isolating him from anyone who might temper it. And I was the only one left who could intervene before disaster struck. Then came the night of the confrontation that would escalate everything further. Jason had left a pile of documents on the dining table, clearly expecting me to ignore them. I picked up one of the contracts and my eyes widened. It involved a risky real estate investment overseas, something I knew could wipe out a substantial portion of his inheritance. My heart pounded. I confronted him immediately. "Jason, this investment, it's dangerous. You could lose millions. Please, just listen to me for 5 minutes." He turned sharply, eyes blazing. "I said I don't need you. I'm done with your advice, done with your interference. Stay out of my life, Mom." The anger in his voice was unlike anything I had heard before. It was not just defiance, it was rage, sharpened by external manipulation. The escalation had reached its peak. Our relationship, the inheritance, everything we had shared, was hanging by a thread. I left the room, holding back tears. I knew I needed a new approach, one that combined patience, subtlety, and strategy. Direct confrontation had failed. The conflict had escalated beyond simple argument. Jason's pride, arrogance, and external influences had created a storm, and I had to navigate it carefully if I hoped to protect him, our bond, and the legacy his father had left behind. By the end of the week, tension in the house was palpable. The air was thick with unspoken words, silent judgments, and quiet threats. I felt like a sailor navigating rough seas, aware that a single misstep could capsize everything. And yet, despite the conflict, I refused to give up. I knew that somewhere beneath the arrogance and manipulation, Jason was still my son, and I had to reach him before it was too late. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. It wasn't planned, and yet I knew it had to happen. The house felt smaller, suffocating, each room a battleground. I had spent days observing, documenting, and planning my approach. But when I walked into the living room that evening, I knew there would be no gentle words, no subtle hints. This was the moment of truth. Jason was at the dining table, laptop open, surrounded by a chaotic spread of financial documents, bank statements, and investment proposals. He didn't look up when I entered. "Mom," he said without inflection, "if you're here to lecture me again, save it. I don't need your advice." I closed the door behind me, took a deep breath, and spoke in a steady voice. "Jason, I'm not here to lecture. I'm here because I need you to understand something important. This," I gestured toward the papers, "this could ruin you if you're not careful, and it's not just about money. It's about your future and about us." He finally looked up, his eyes sharp, almost wild. "You don't get it, Mom. I'm $25 million in control now. I can make decisions without you. I don't need anyone telling me what to do. I swallowed hard. I know you think that. But money isn't wisdom. You're being guided by people who don't care about you. They want your trust, your independence, so they can manipulate you. And right now, you're blind to it. Jason laughed bitterly. Manipulate me? Mom, that's rich. You're just upset that I don't need you anymore. That's all. No, Jason. That's not all. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to stay calm. I've watched everything. The emails, the transfers, the investments. I've seen the people who are influencing you. And I know you trust them more than me. But they don't love you. They're using your money to control you. His face turned red, veins visible at his temples. You don't know anything, he shouted. You're just my mother. You think you can tell me what to do, but I'm not a kid anymore. I don't need you. I took a step closer, holding a small stack of papers in my hand, the ones I had been saving as evidence. Jason, look at this, I said softly. These are contracts you've signed. Some are dangerous. Some could cost you millions. And look at this letter from your father. He wanted you to have guidance, wisdom, patience. All the things I've tried to teach you, all the things I've tried to protect you from. His hand shook as he reached for the documents. For a moment, I thought he might tear them up. Instead, he froze, staring at the papers as though seeing them for the first time. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between pride and reason, between arrogance and love. Then he said something that made my heart stop. Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner? I thought you were just being overprotective. I tried, I said, my voice breaking, but you shut me out. You wouldn't listen. I didn't know if you'd even believe me. Jason's shoulders slumped. The bravado, the arrogance, the defiance, they all seemed to crumble in an instant. For the first time in days, he looked vulnerable. I didn't realize. I thought I could handle it on my own. I thought I was smart enough. But maybe I've been blind. I sat down across from him, my hands trembling. You've always been smart, Jason, but money can blind anyone. It can make even the brightest person forget who they are, who they trust, and what really matters. I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to protect you. He buried his face in his hands. I was scared, Mom. I didn't want to feel small. I thought if I ignored you, if I ignored everything, I could prove I was grown, independent, capable. But I didn't see the danger. I reached out, touching his shoulder. It's okay. That's why I'm here. That's why I've been watching. To make sure you don't fall into traps that could ruin you. And right now, we can fix this together. But you have to trust me. Jason looked up, tears in his eyes. I do. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to shut you out completely. I wanted to feel like I was in control. You are in control, I said gently, but control doesn't mean you ignore wisdom, experience, and love. It means using them to make the right decisions. You don't have to do this alone. You never did. He nodded slowly, taking in a shaky breath. I see that now. I let my pride take over, and I let other people influence me. I thought they were helping, but I see it now. They were using me. Yes, I said, relief flooding me, and that's why I've been patient. I knew the real Jason, the one I raised, the one who values family, integrity, and patience, was still in there. You just needed a moment to see it yourself. He leaned back, tears streaming down his face. Mom, I was so wrong. I didn't realize I could lose everything, our bond, my future, because of my own arrogance. I reached out and hugged him, feeling the tension release in a wave I hadn't dared hope for. It's not too late, Jason. We can fix this. Together, we'll go through the investments, the contracts, the advisors. We'll protect your inheritance, and we'll rebuild our trust. For the first time since the inheritance, he smiled genuinely. Thank you, Mom. I don't deserve you. I was foolish. You deserve guidance, I said softly. And you deserve to make smart decisions. That's all I've ever wanted for you. We sat together at the dining table long into the night, reviewing every document, every contract, every risky transfer. The external influences that had driven him to arrogance were neutralized one by one. We devised a plan to safeguard his inheritance, to correct the reckless choices, and to ensure that he could thrive without falling prey to manipulation. And in that moment, I realized something profound. The climax wasn't just about the money or the confrontation. It was about connection, trust, and the unshakable bond between mother and son. Jason's pride had brought us to the brink, but love, patience, and truth had brought us back. By the time we finished, exhaustion settled over us, but so did relief. The confrontation had been fierce, raw, and emotional, but it had revealed the truth, the manipulation, the arrogance, the rebellion. They could all be overcome with honesty and care. And most importantly, Jason and I had found each other again, standing stronger because of the storm we had weathered together. The days that followed the confrontation were quieter, but the calm felt earned rather than given. Jason seemed different, less defensive, less arrogant, more attentive. The storm had passed, and in its wake, something fragile but real was rebuilt. I watched him move through the house, a boy I had raised, yet a man now capable of seeing beyond pride. We spent hours going through investments, reviewing every risky transfer, and correcting the mistakes he had made under influence. Some of the advisors were dismissed immediately. Contracts were renegotiated or canceled. I explained the consequences of every decision, pointing out not just financial risk, but ethical and practical pitfalls. Jason listened, nodding, sometimes asking questions with a humility I hadn't seen in weeks. For the first time, he admitted to the external influence. "Mom," he said one evening, "Ethan, he made me think I was smarter than I was, that I could do everything alone. I see now he was pushing me toward mistakes, and I almost fell for it. I was blind." "You weren't blind, Jason," I said gently. "You were misled, but the important thing is that you see it now. And that's what matters." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I owe you more than I can say. I didn't realize how much I depended on you, not just for advice, but for guidance, for patience, for everything." I nodded, feeling a surge of relief mixed with pride. "You've grown, Jason. You've learned. But remember this, wisdom isn't just about knowing what to do with money. It's about knowing when to ask for help, when to listen, and when to pause." Over the following weeks, our home slowly returned to something resembling normalcy. The photographs were returned to their proper places. Letters and keys were respected again as symbols of our shared history. Jason even placed a small note of apology on the kitchen counter, handwritten, "Thank you, Mom. I promise to listen, to value your guidance, and never take it for granted again." Financially, he began making smarter decisions. Investments were cautious but strategic, and he sought advice from qualified professionals rather than those who sought to manipulate him. The inheritance, once a source of tension and danger, became a tool for stability, growth, and opportunity. Jason learned to balance ambition with prudence, independence with humility. Emotionally, the changes were even more profound. Jason reached out to me daily, not just for advice, but to talk, to share ideas, to include me. The arrogance that had once defined him was tempered by respect and gratitude. The locked doors, the dismissals, the isolation, all were gone. In their place was connection, trust, and the quiet comfort of shared understanding. I also realized something about myself. The ordeal had tested my patience, my resilience, and my capacity to guide without controlling. I had learned that love isn't about asserting authority. It's about presence, observation, and knowing when to intervene. My role hadn't changed. I was still his mother, but the dynamic had shifted. Now, we functioned as a team, bound by experience, trust, and the lessons we had both learned. The poetic justice was subtle but undeniable. Jason's recklessness, his pride, and his initial dismissal of me had led him to a precipice. But in recognizing his mistakes and returning to the values I had instilled in him, he reclaimed not only his inheritance, but his integrity, and we reclaimed the bond that mattered more than money ever could. The external manipulations that had threatened to pull us apart were neutralized, and Jason emerged stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of the foundation he had once ignored. I kept a small stack of letters, keys, and photographs on the dining table, now more than symbols. They were reminders of what we had overcome together. Each time Jason passed them, he smiled, a subtle acknowledgement of our shared history and the lessons that had shaped him. And for me, there was a quiet satisfaction. I had weathered fear, manipulation, and heartbreak, but I had not lost my son. I had not allowed external influence to sever the bond we had spent years building. And in that, there was victory. A victory not of money, not of dominance, but of love, patience, and unwavering guidance. In the end, the resolution was simple yet profound. Jason understood the value of guidance, the danger of arrogance, and the importance of listening to those who care. And I understood that love, when patient and persistent, could navigate even the stormiest seas. Looking back now, I see the entire journey not as a story of money, but as a story of trust, patience, and love. The $25 million inheritance was never the real test. It was only the stage where deeper lessons played out. The real challenge was whether my son and I could find each other again when pride, manipulation, and arrogance tried to drive us apart. I have learned that wealth reveals character, both in those who receive it and in those who circle around, eager to influence and exploit. Jason was young, unprepared, and convinced he could stand alone. But independence without wisdom is fragile, and pride without humility is dangerous. As a mother, my instinct was to fight, to demand, to force him to listen. But what saved us wasn't force. It was patience, persistence, and quiet reminders of who he truly was. In the end, Jason discovered that guidance isn't weakness, it's strength. Asking for help doesn't mean you failed. It means you're wise enough to learn. And now, I want to ask you, the ones listening to my story, have you ever faced a moment where someone you love was slipping away, convinced they didn't need you, only to realize later that your presence was their anchor? How did you handle it? I would love to hear your experiences. Share your thoughts in the comments, because stories like these remind us we are never truly alone when love guides the way.